Welcome to the Hardwood Time Capsule podcast presented by Callaway Golf. This episode features arguably the most iconic voice of the NBL in the 1980s and 1990s, a smooth and relatable television host that helped pioneer basketball media in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Woods. Mr. Bill Woods,
Hello,
welcome
mate.
to the podcast. Good. How are you?
Well, thank you. Are you filming this as well? Because I can change the.
Yeah, we sure are. Yep. But you can change whatever you want.
I'll leave it. I'll leave it as it is.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. I think it's going to be enjoyable to take a little bit of a walk down memory lane, especially for the listeners. We posted a few things on our Instagram throughout the week regarding the Saturday basketball show and those sort of things, and got some great responses. So I think it's going to bring back a few memories, which will be good because unfortunately, like we've sort of mentioned in the messages backwards and forwards, Channel 10 weren't great at archiving and keeping a lot of those memories. But before we go down that route, maybe we'll just get you to touch on sort of what you're up to these days and what's keeping you busy.
Well, I'm not overly busy. I had a show on Fox Sports called Bill and Boz, which was almost the culmination of all the years I've worked on sport and news, but basically the sporting part of my career, because it was just the ideal sit down talk about sport with sports people. And it still is unique in that sense because we had no comedians, no journalists, not because we didn't like them or they weren't useful in their own way, but it was a specific angle to have athletes, particularly those who've competed at a very high level, sitting around having discussions about their experiences and sharing their stories. And the reason I bring that up is that, would you believe, people like Andrew Bogut and other guys, the Harlem Globetrotters, were on that show. And I can't say the Harlem Globetrotters had heard of us, but all the Australian athletes began to hear about the show because it was an opportunity for them to, actually sit around unfiltered and talk to each other about sport. But anyway, that kind of died with COVID, and since then I've been doing some work on radio, Talkback Radio in Sydney with 2GB, and a bunch of other sort of smaller projects with sporting clubs and things like that. I'm working on a documentary series and doing sort of bits and pieces, appearing on various Olympic Games coverages, for example, doing a bit of commentary, and just stuff like that. Whatever floats towards me and I like the look of it, I'll take it up. Yeah,
no, that's fantastic. And I was an avid fan of Bill and Boz, and I think it's one of those things that is great about anyone that has been as successful as you in media, is that you can get people to relax quickly. Get them to chat. We'll go a bit into what Steve Carfino mentioned on the podcast a little bit later, just about the exact same thing about how you helped him to relax and get those athletes to just be themselves. And I think it was a good combination for any of the listeners that hear this and that have watched Bill and Boz. I think it was a perfect combination as well, because Boz is a bit of a larrikin and he's laid back and it was just a bit of a match made in heaven. So yeah, I think that the other thing is, when you look at those shows, I think it allows you to push the boundaries from the media trained stock standard answers and get those athletes to really open up, which I think is really great. And I want to sort of take us back a little bit though to sort of where it started, and that's because a lot of people remember Saturday basketball, right? So we're talking 30 plus years ago now.
You're stretching my memory, Drew.
Yeah, and there was a really thirsty audience of basketball fans, and a show was put together, I guess, without delving too much into that show, because for those that are on our podcast will recall that show well. Most of us are big basketball nuts. That's why we're following the podcast. Do you recall whether it was a pilot, whether it was meant to be as successful as it was, whether it was yourself that was approached, to host it with Steve? What was the situation there?
Well, bear in mind, back in those days, we didn't have streaming, we didn't have mobile, there was no social media.
Yeah.
So basically, whenever a mainstream network, whether it was commercial or government, took on the hosting rights to a sport, the broadcasting rights to a sport, it was always a standard thing to have a weekly show that went with it.
Yeah.
So, and there might be offshoots of those shows as well that were more specific, depending on how big the sport was at the time. Like if it's footy, for example, you know, you could have a number of shows. In terms of basketball, it all began with, well, it really began with a guy called Peter Viner, whose name would not be remembered by very many people. But when a company based in Canada called CanWest took over the ownership of Channel 10, it was in dire straits, the network. And CanWest, and particularly Peter Viner, who was sent here to run the network, this Canadian gentleman, and from the outset, I've never been very good at managing up, so I didn't spend a lot of time in the boss's office back in the day, but I did find Peter Viner to be a thorough gentleman and a very smart guy. And he took a network that at the time was struggling. He gave them things like The Simpsons, Seinfeld, and basketball. Channel 7 had basketball. I think ABC had basketball. There had always been a presence for the game, and there was no disrespect when you look at the history to those networks and how well they did with the sports. Some mates of mine used to call basketball on Channel 7 back in the day, guys like John Harker and Mark Chester. Now, I think this is before Case, by the way. Case came along on 7 later than those guys, I think. Yeah. But anyway, we though were the first ones to sort of glamorize it and put it up there. And that's because we didn't have anything else. Channel 10 had lost the rights to rugby league. People even forget we had those rights, by the way. But yeah, the Channel 10 had rugby league for a while. So they lost the rights to rugby league. And so Peter Viner was looking around for a sport to pick up. And at that time, and this is how astute Peter Viner was, and being Canadian, he would have picked up on this. But at that time, you might recall that hoops was getting really big because the rap artists were starting to wear basketball gear. So NBA merchandise had become a real fad in the United States. And that was kind of leaking into Australian culture, like everything else in America. Yeah. And so there was this real confluence. You had this incredible era of Johnson, Bird, Jordan starting to evolve through into the early 90s. And then, so you had this incredible standard in the NBA, this golden period, again, with no disrespect to those who came before them, but, you know, it really started to hit the highlights. And then couple that with the whole NBA rap, fad, culture, fashion, it just came together, was starting to leak strongly into Australia. Viner saw all this, saw the NBL as an extension of that. Of course, we always chose really exciting American imports as best we could. Sometimes we pick role players depending on the coach's attitude, but you're probably aware in those days we often went for guys who could dunk the ball and pull off the spectacular plays. That got the bums on seats. So there was still an identification with US culture in our game. So, yeah, Viner picked up the NBL rights and decided to actually broadcast games live. Ultimately, that didn't last very long. For even Network 10, which was desperate at the time, and there was still this traditional TV epidemic of, you know, terrified of something failing for more than a few weeks. They wouldn't stick with anything for very long. I think they should have, but anyway, they stopped the live games after a couple of months. But to put it on live on Saturday nights, to have this showcase Saturday basketball show and a whole bunch of spin-offs was quite inspired, because Saturday basketball also tapped into the culture of the sport at the time. There were a lot of kids following it. They were wearing the gear. So we gave out the merchandise. Again, in those days, the only way to get merchandise of American sports was to go to specific specialty shops. There might be one in Melbourne, one in Sydney, for example. I remember doing a story for 10 in the newsroom of the first store in Sydney to sell overseas sports merchandise. It was that big a deal. Now, of course, you can buy it all online. It's everywhere. But in those days, it was quite a rare thing. And the connectivity with it, you know, when I was following international sport, I'm a big Premier League football fan, for example. you'd get your results in the newspapers, and your magazines came to Australia a week after they were produced in Britain, and all those things. And so there was a little bit of that for the NBA at that time, even into the early 90s. So, yeah, Viner was inspired. So he got the rights to basketball. And the coincidence there was that Steve, as you know, Mr. Magic, was a very, very popular player, not only one of the great point guards to play the game here, but also a charismatic, much loved personality. He could talk the talk, but he had this beautiful balance of being respected and admired. And even though he played for the Kings, but he did play for the Hobart Tassie Devils as well. So that probably gave him a bit of leeway with the southern states. But anyway, he was a very respected player and a great ambassador for the game. And kind of sadly, he had that back injury that ended his career. I remember going to the news conference as a reporter before I even knew that Ten had picked up the rights to basketball. And I knew Steve through being a reporter on the game, and I sympathised with him, and we only knew each other as star and reporter, but we got on quite well. And then, funnily enough, Ten picks up the rights and comes to me and says, "Well, you're a young bloke. You sort of know basketball. I played it for my school. I played it as a kid, and so they asked me if I had much of an affinity with the game. I said, yeah, I love it. And so they said, well, we're going to do basketball. We're going to do it big. We'd like you to host it. And Steve Carfino's retired, so we're going to get him to be the expert commentator, and he'll host shows with you. And I knew instantly, even though Steve and I hadn't even sat down to talk about what we were going to do, I said to them, that is a great move. Steve is just brilliant. This is going to be really good. I couldn't think of anyone better to actually do this with. And would you believe Steve and I are only not months apart in age as well. So, we had a lot going on, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, again, just like I said with Bill and Boz, with you two, it was a perfect meeting because you got yourself, who's a basketball reporter and willing to take on the new show, and then you've got Steve, who's as those that listened to his podcast episode, was just willing to do anything. I mean, he put his hand up to sing the national anthem when the singer couldn't perform, so he'll throw himself in the deep end at any opportunity. But I will read out what Steve had to say about you, because I think it's really important, considering you've just mentioned, how much of a charismatic guy and outgoing as he was. It's still another thing to, I guess, jump in front of the camera with a professional like yourself. And also, there would have no doubt been a bit of pressure at the time, because the reality was, for fans like us, it was pretty much our only dose of basketball. So we'd be racing home from training, I remember, on a Saturday, or when they started to show one NBA game a week, just to get our hit. Because, I remember one year watching an NBA tape of one game, and I must have watched it 20 times just because that's all you could watch. So Steve went on to say, he goes, I was so stiff. This is about starting out with yourself. I was so stiff and nervous, but I got a lot of great advice along the way. I got to work with Billy Woods, who's just a master of live TV. He reads the 5 o'clock news. He's an author who writes fiction. He's incredibly intelligent. Bill used to say, God, if I had your confidence to go with his ability, would be the greatest person on television ever. And then he said, also, people aren't stupid, so just be yourself. Don't try to be anyone else. And he said that was all the advice that I needed to sort of to loosen up a little bit and go for it. So I guess that sort of leads me on to something else I wanted to discuss with you. And we're going to jump around a little bit here.
That's okay.
Is when you've got a situation like that, again, even though you're similar in age, you're clearly, it's your profession he's stepping into. And I discussed this with Brett Maher as well on the podcast about when he started commentary after his athletic career. Did he get training? Did he have a mentor? Those sort of things. And he said yes and no. It was a little bit fluffy. And with media being so big between ESPN and YouTube and apps and all that sort of stuff now, and obviously ex-players and retired players coming into the media spectrum, do they get matched up, generally speaking, with someone like yourself, someone like a Bruce McAvaney or yeah, Dennis Committee, something like that. Does that occur?
Well, it still does. It used to be a little bit more, again, formulaic, if you like. There was always, and you'll see this all over the world, there was always the play-by-play person matched up with what they used to call the colour guy or the colour person. That is, they provide all the analysis, and colour being, in-depth insight, et cetera, et cetera. So the play-by-play person's usually a dedicated commentator, and then you've got your person who really knows the inside outs of the game. And look, having played for my high school in no way qualified me to call NBL. Don't get me wrong. I was soaking up every bit of information I could from Steve like a sponge prior to our first call, because there was still so much I didn't know, obviously. And that brings us to the other thing. And this is just my philosophy, because there are others who are different. And there are people who probably might have the personality and some kind of, I don't know, credibility from another profession. I don't know. But from my perspective, if I ever write my memoirs, the title is going to be called The Other Guy, because I was only really there just to steer the ship, facilitate getting in and out of breaks, keep the rhythm of the show going, but make sure that Steve was always the people that, the person people looked up to, and the person that they looked up to for the real answers and information. I could do stats and all that stuff. Like, there's no one better than Bruce at doing all that stuff. But the key to that stuff is deploying the right stats at the right time, and not just stats for the sake of stats.
Yeah.
Stuff. Oh, that's great. So also stats that might not be particularly relevant, but they might be funny or interesting, or, you put a smile on your face, things like that. But basically, the person that's the real star of the show is the expert. They're the words that people are going to hang on. No, they're gonna say, look, my team's not going well, or my team's going really well. I want to know why. I think this guy shouldn't be playing in the 3 spot, but does the colour person or the expert commentator agree with me? You know what I mean? They're the kind of real stars of the show, in my opinion. And people like me are just basically facilitators. I see myself as a bridge between the fan and the expert, or the fan and the athlete, if I'm doing interviews, etc. I'm just that conduit, trying to be the person who hits the right notes that the fans want to hear, or asks the right questions the fans want to ask. That's my job. And I think sometimes people in my job get carried away with just what they are and who they are. And so I think sometimes they need to take a step back. I've worked with a lot of great people like Steve in a variety of sports over the years, Boz being another one, of course. And maybe occasionally I stepped out of line, but my ambition was to never let those guys or girls be upstaged, or placed second by the person who's just hosting the show.
Yeah, but in that same regard, I think that's an incredible art in itself, because how do you know where the line is, and how do you know when I guess that person needs a bit more support, or if you go, all right, like is it just a feeling that, like, all right, they're really confident now, they know what they're doing, they don't need their hand held as much, that sort of thing, or when do I need to reel them in? And I think that'll be a good segue to sort of going back more into your own stuff when it comes to getting into the industry. I guess to bring up another commentator, I was listening to the Howie Games not long ago podcast, and they had on Ray Rabbit's Warren, and I think your voice, you're probably going to be too humble to say it, so I'll say it for you, is your voice is going to be one of those ones in 30, 40 years' time when people still hear it, on recordings or whatever, just like they'll remember Ray Rabbits for NRL and Dennis Committee for AFL. They'll immediately know who that voice is. And listening to him on the Howie Games talk about how he got into calling and those sort of things made me think, how did you actually go in? Was it something that because especially with live, and Steve touched on that, how well you did at live TV. So growing up, and obviously, whether it's studying it or whatever, did you feel it came natural to you, or was it something you really had to work on? And it was this, I guess, lastly, was it something that you thought early on in high school or something, that's what you wanted to do?
Well, you've probably heard this from Rabs and Bruce and those guys, who I'm proud to say, spent some time with them early days too, and learned a lot from. But I was one of those kids. I played a lot of sport, and ironically, I was a choker. Not so much in team sports where I could always lean on somebody else, but particularly individual sports. I was one of those guys who was on the blocks of the swimming carnival, and I'd go, hang on a minute, and run off to the toilet if I could hold it. I was that bad. So why I'm telling you this is that I was also one of those guys or kids who would be doing commentary while I was kicking the ball around the backyard.
Right.
And everything. I mean, everything. I had invented my own little cricket game in my bedroom, soccer. I was one of the few people probably in southern New South Wales to have an old AFL. It wasn't AFL in those days, it was VFL, of course. It was a footy game. It was called Aussie Footy. And you'd flick this button around and you had actual posts. Looked a little bit like those cricket games where you bowl the ball down the chute.
Yes.
And it was just, and all the old teams were in it. And I had one of those. I'd do commentary on that, everything, rugby league, all sports, and played most of those sports, those that I could possibly play that were available to play at the school. But the funny part was, I was probably always just a lot more relaxed and confident talking about it, as much as I loved playing it. And I was a pretty intense player too, not quite Kyrgios level, but never as good as I wanted to be. Anyway, I don't know why that is. I don't know why I was able to, when the red light goes on TV, manage to stay composed, and some weird stuff's happened to me over the years on air. But when I was on the sporting field, I remember saying to Steve once at the Kings game, it was 2 seconds on the clock or something like that, and they called a timeout, right? So they got the ball inbound, and they're going to run a play to try and win the game or whatever. I don't know whether they're probably 1 point down or something. So it's either win or lose type of thing. And I remember in commentary saying to Steve's telling us who he thinks might get the ball and who might get the open look. And I remember saying to Steve in commentary, I'm pretty sure it was live, I'd hate to be the guy who has to take this shot. And Steve looked at me and said, are you kidding me? Never, ever, ever in my whole career did I say that. It was always, give me the ball. Give me the ball. You want to win this game? I want the ball. And I said, and that, Steve, is why you're a winner and I'm a loser. And it was just one of those moments because it did really sum up my sporting career and why Steve's playing, got selected in the NBA draft. So anyway, that's kind of the nub of it. So in the end, and in growing up in a small country town as well, I did play rep sports, but I never really had the opportunity to get properly coached or have access to, and back in the 70s, bear in mind, no one's making money out of playing sport. There wasn't a lot of money around. So it wasn't something kids thought of as a thing to do for a living. So it was always, to me, a recreational thing. And I didn't have the sort of platform to do it. So anyway, I just thought, well, I want to be a journalist. And it was really only a side issue that wouldn't it be fun to do some commentary? And it wouldn't matter. I didn't care what it was about, but it was something I was kind of fantasized about, but I never really thought would happen. And so I went into journalism to write and report and all those things. And it wasn't probably until Channel 10. That might have even been the first time that I even considered for real doing commentary.
So to that point, had you been doing like written journalism, that sort of thing?
Yes, I was a newsreader and reporter in radio for a number of years. And funnily enough, the 2WS newsroom back in the 1980s, early 80s, was actually a very big newsroom, and we covered everything. I was sent to Wimbledon, for example, as a news reporter. And I covered all the Swans games. Learned so much from Tommy Hafey back in the day when the Swans emerged. And I went from being a Collingwood supporter to I felt like I had to become a Swans supporter because Tommy was so good to me, just teaching me the game and things like that. So anyway, I was covering all sports, and occasionally on radio, you'd do a little bit of commentary. We didn't have the broadcast rights to anything, but if they crossed to you, I'd do regular crosses every half hour or so into programming, and whatever I was seeing on the field, I'd call. But so basically, before I did basketball on Channel 10, I'd done no more than 2 or 3 minutes actual commentary on anything that I can remember. I called the last few minutes of Pat Cash winning Wimbledon in 1987.
Wow.
From Wimbledon.
Yeah.
That was just luck. I just happened to be there. All good careers need a lot of luck, trust me. And I just happened to be there at that day. But anyway, so it was my first serious plan for the season. Do your homework, go to training, learn the teams, watch them train, all that stuff that goes into commentary. That was when I first did it. But the funny thing was, Drew, that even after, and I enjoyed commentary very much, and I've done it on a number of things on and off, but I was too interested in all the other facets of broadcasting to actually focus on it. So basically, like as you mentioned earlier, I've written books, I've actually produced things, and I've done all sorts of stuff, news reading, news reporting, all those things. But and there are a lot of skills that go through all those disciplines. But I was so interested in all facets of broadcasting that I never actually focused just on commentary or just on hosting or just on reporting. I think to my detriment in some ways, without going into details. It's sometimes difficult to be a jack of all trades and master of none. But yeah, I was just too interested in doing other things. So that's why, if anyone wondered, I didn't follow basketball, for example, to where it went after Channel 10.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think similar to what Steve said is a lesson for the listeners is just put yourself out there because
there are opportunities. It sounds like you said yes to a lot of things, which I know you say might have been to your detriment. But the reality is you don't grow and you don't know things, and then you'll grow old with less regret if you put yourself out there and give yourself opportunities. It was interesting you touched on going to trainings and those sort of things, because a few other commentators that I've spoken to, I guess, are not resentful about the current commentators. Certainly not resentful. That's not the right word, but I guess feel like they had to put a lot more background work into preparing for matches because, again, I know I'm referring a lot to Steve's episode here, but he would have to go or choose to go to training and watch their plays to see what they were going to run, see how the guys were going, see who was out injured, all those sort of things. Getting game tape was tougher, and these days everything's at their fingertips in terms of information, and they can essentially prepare from a studio rather than actually driving out to the training ground and going on site, or in these days having such a big network in media that you can send, again, for lack of a better word, a lackey down to have a look at training and then I guess report back on what's going on. So and they talk about John Casey's black book of information. I think Bruce is the same. It's just got stats beyond stats and those sort of things. But everyone's different. I think Rabs in the NRL goes a lot off intuition. What was it for you? Are you a big notes person? Are you more just so involved in it that it's not necessary? What do you like in preparation?
Well, there were two layers. Handwritten notes is big for me because it somehow got into my brain better that way. So never typed anything. It was all handwritten. I think you find most of the commentators are like that. There's got to be some physiological reason for
it. It's actually well researched, and there's academic papers that say you do take in more handwritten than you do typed. Yeah.
And the other thing was never underestimate. It's a little bit like team sports, actually. Never underestimate just sitting around as a group, that is commentators and producers and reporters as necessary, and talking. We used to, particularly from the basketball days right through to when I did triathlons, motorsport, rugby, a whole range of sports. Whenever I was deeply involved or embedded in a broadcast of sport, a lot of that, and I invoked this if it didn't exist, was to get together as a team, like not partying necessarily, but having dinners together, having meals together, having meetings, and just sitting around and talking about the sport. the other thing there too is from someone like me, I was very careful. As I said, I'm sure I stepped across the line a few times, but I tried not to. I was very careful to try and get as much knowledge as I could, but not use it in the same way that the experts would. I would get that knowledge so I knew what questions to ask them, how to lead them to an area that I thought the fans might be interested in, but not necessarily impart that knowledge myself as an expert, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I can report something. I was at training this week and I saw them doing this. That's okay. But for me to say, they've been running this play and I don't think it works, that's not for me. That's a boundary I tried never to cross. And I would tell my experts, if I ever sound like I'm stepping over that line, hit me in the head. Because, and that's a common mistake, I think, that a lot of commentators make. I think some who've been around a long time are entitled to probably start making judgments. I'm not going to, deny them that. But that was just my philosophy. I felt like no matter how much I thought I knew, especially the fans quite often think, well, who are you to say that? Even if I'm actually right. So
that's very clever. Was that something that was taught to you, or that's just your take?
No, that's my take. Because don't forget, and Drew, you know this too. You're doing a podcast. I've done commentary and hosting, but we're still fans. You and I started out watching sport like everybody else, and we still do. You and I, when we're not doing our thing, we still sit down every weekend and try and give our wives or partners an excuse as to why this is important. We sit down and watch our sport, and we're just like fans. We go straight back into that mindset. So, I try to be the fan as well, which I think is important because I need to feel like I'm doing the job for them when I'm on screen or on the radio. So I think that's an important connection. I think the mistake some people can make, and let's face it, TV and radio, particularly TV, is very show busy. And I think that the mistake some young people make is to think they're some kind of star and start acting that way and distancing themselves from what they're all about. I think that's something we need to constantly think about.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. I guess, when we look at the longevity, and you mentioned there being fans as well as, as well as doing it as a profession, is when you merge the two, often for people that merge their love and then their job, eventually there's burnout. And we hear it a lot with the athletes especially. And obviously they've got physical burnout as well as just mental or emotional burnout. How have you been doing it for so long without, I guess, it just becoming overwhelming and or just getting sick and tired of it, to be honest? Obviously, you're in a job that something that you love. You don't loathe going to work and doing these things, but how have you managed to keep the mojo so high for so long?
Well, funnily enough, it gets back to that point I made about being jack of all trades. I would do, even back in the day, I would be hosting a talkback radio show as a fill-in on a weekend, for example, and talking about politics and all that heavy stuff. And during the week, I might have been doing motorsport or basketball. So that's that kind of. There's a couple of things there. First of all, it keeps you grounded. I remember Neil Crompton saying to me once when we were covering motorsport, we're out at a Grand Prix somewhere in Europe, and I was looking at the website and I was saying, I don't know, it was some political story I'd read. I went, oh, this is happening back there in Australia or something. And Crompton said, man, I haven't looked at a newspaper for a couple of days because I've been so focused on. At that time, I think he was driving as well, and he said to me, he said, you know what? It's not a bad thing, Woodsy, keeping track of stuff other than what you do, because it actually puts you back in the real world and gives you a sense of perspective. And I think that's another important thing is we as commentators, whether you're a political commentator, and I think it's a big mistake political commentators make sometimes, by the way. One of them said to me once, I was covering a federal election, and one of the reporters said to me, well, I know you just hosted a grand final, because I might have been at the MCG or something. Anyway, and they said, well, now you're at our grand final. And I said to them, I'd like to think you treat it a bit more seriously than a bloody grand final. This is the leadership of the country we're talking about here. Anyway, but you know what I'm saying? it's important, I think, to get a bit of perspective. So I might be off doing a news story, for example, or I might be covering other sports. And so I think, in a sense, that was beneficial to me, even if it didn't allow me, I suppose, to really dominate or get a foothold in certain areas like other guys and girls have done. And as I said, sometimes that was to my detriment, but generally I'm quite happy with the fact that I really enjoyed not only getting deep into something at some particular time, but also being able to get out of it again and back into the real world. For example, I was intensely. People said to me, if they didn't like motorsport, people said to me, "Where have you been the last few years?" Because Channel 10 dominated motorsport for quite a while, and I was hosting all of that. I was working 70 or 80 hours a week, a lot of that on air, because Channel 10 had all this motorsport. But when Ronnie Wilson was on holidays, I was reading the 5 o'clock news, and that was great to actually get back into the real world for a while. And I was still hosting a few Sports Tonights then as well. So I was, keeping track of all the other sports that were on, and I really enjoyed that, just to be able to step out into another place.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think the balance is. It makes sense. I mean, to have that longevity and have stuff outside of it, especially when you, I guess, contrast that with the opposite. When someone's, especially on the other side of the camera, the athletes, some of them going to the AIS as young as 15, 16, and then by the time their career comes to an end in their late 30s, they haven't given life afterwards another thought. And we've had people on this podcast cry over it, because it's a real depression that they can fall into afterwards, because they just not just the career's finished, but the structure's gone, the emotion's gone, they're lost, they're alone, they're no longer put up on a pedestal by a lot of people, and how to deal with that, and relationships and stuff. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is having a family that keeps you grounded is important as well. I've always had a very rock solid wife and kids and sisters and in-laws and all those people who really, they don't give I'm nothing. When I get back to having dinner and lunch and mowing the lawn and all those things, and I don't get anyone to clean my pool or mow my lawn or wash my car. I like to do that. I'm a bit of a home handyman. My dad was a tradie. I grew up as my first trade was a carpet layer. My dad was a builder, but he went into carpet laying. So that was what I did for a trade from a very young age, and I was still doing it I even had guys at Channel 10 come up to me and say, "Can you lay my carpet for me?" And I tell them to get nodded, of course.
Yeah.
But
Not good for your knees, carpet laying. Geez.
But I did it for other people. I like my in-laws and stuff. I just still did it for family and myself and things. So all that stuff helps you not think you're getting too big for your boots, And I know people in my industry, similarly to what you're saying, who don't want to retire because they feel like A, they don't know what else to do with themselves, and B, sadly, they think the public needs them. And I'm afraid, with great respect, they don't. No, they don't need us. They don't need to see us every week. Their lives are going to go on quite nicely, thank you, without us turning up on the radio or the TV. Life goes on. And I think that kind of state of mind is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah. No, that's thanks for sharing that, because for people listening, that can help give them some perspective. And by the way, are any of the kids following in your footsteps in terms of media or commentary or anything?
So funny you should say that. I was with my daughter yesterday. She was over here for a couple of days with her cat, and and I said, "Man, you would have been so much better than me on TV." She's such a bright personality. She's smart. She's clever. She's very quick-witted and articulate. Of course, I'm talking about my own daughter here, Dad's little girl. But anyway, but she never wanted to. She's a producer for an advertising agency. She produces commercials, but she never wanted to be in front of the camera. I sat her on a chair at Channel 10 in a studio once, and she just lit up the studio. And I remember the floor manager and the director saying to me, "Oh, my goodness, Bill, this girl's got it in spades." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know if I ever wanted to go into TV," but she didn't. Not in that regard anyway. And one of my sons runs his own business, aquarium maintenance, totally different to, and the other one works. Well, he was working as a technical director for a number of TV networks, but now he's off out of the television industry, basically selling audio-visual equipment. So he works for a company that sort of deals in that stuff. So they all took very different paths, really, and none of them really wanted to get in front of the camera, which is unusual. As you probably know, a lot of guys and girls like me, their kids tend to follow in their footsteps.
Yes, yeah. I guess that was hence the question, is because you do see it quite often. I mean, down here in Melbourne, we're sort of seeing it with Eddie Maguire and his son starting to push through into the journalism stuff. I think it was on Neighbours or something as well, going into those spaces. A question I ask a lot of the athletes, just because with basketball, as you all know, the landscape of that transition from juniors into seniors has changed a lot in the last 30 years, where it was kind of, if you're a talented junior, you go to the AIS and then you go into the NBL. Now there's more than hundreds, there's probably thousands that choose to go to college in America, and things like that. Or if you don't get a gig in the NBL, you might choose to go and play in New Zealand, or you go and play in Europe, or so many different pathways. And I often ask some of the ones that didn't go overseas, like we had Matt Shanahan on the other day.
I remember that.
Yeah, and he stayed in Australia. And I guess the question I always ask them is, when did you think of going overseas? Did you think of going overseas? Now, in your caper, I guess there's traveling like you did with the motorsport and those sort of things. But we haven't really seen, off the top of my head, too much of commentators getting gigs overseas. I guess the Americans like their own people when it comes to basketball and things like that. Did you ever think of like going abroad for a while? Was that even an option?
It's so funny you should say that, because a good mate of mine is Lee Diffie, who was an NBC commentator, called the 100 at the Olympic Games in Tokyo. And he's an Aussie who worked with me on the motorsport at 10 for years. Lee had a remarkable career. That's another story, probably for another day, but he worked his way through the ranks as a commentator. And because of the motorsports international connections, he managed to do some commentary for World Superbike Championship, and he moved on to United States, doing things like NASCAR and IndyCar, and that got him a role within the NBC when they got the rights to it. Like I said, a lot of these careers, a little bit like sport, I guess, and winning grand finals, you need a bit of luck. As good as you can be, sometimes you need a bit of luck to be in the right team at the right time. Anyway, Stiffy, as we affectionately call him, Stiffy finished up working for the NBC, and they started offering him gigs calling stuff at the Olympics, and finished up. Now he's calling the prestige 100 metres at the Olympic Games. He is one of very few Australians to have gone overseas. I think for the most part, most people are quite happy staying here. The money's good enough. And of course, you can't beat living in Australia. I never thought of it. It never, ever occurred to me. Possibly when Lee went over there, he rang me up and he said, he said, someone at the NBC said, and I'm now going to drop the humility for a sec, so forgive me.
No, go
Someone
ahead.
at the NBC said, you Australian, we never thought of you Australians as being very talented. He said, how come you're so good at commentary? And Stiffy very kindly said, well, I was trained by a guy called Bill Woods back in Australia. And they went, who? Never heard of that guy. And he said, oh, yeah, well, I worked under him at Channel 10 for a number of years. And it was very nice of Stiffy to say that. But the point is, we are, I think, and look, I've watched a lot of overseas commentary, and I think we underestimate ourselves as TV and as broadcasters here in Australia. We've done a lot of world-leading stuff, and our commentators are as good, if not better, than others in the world. The whole cultural cringe thing of needing to hear an English person call soccer, for example, or an American call basketball. I loved hearing Steve Quartermain and Dean Templeton calling basketball, all the Melbourne games back in the 70s. It was fantastic. As much as I love Steve, and he was ideal, don't get me wrong, but it didn't have to be an American, if you know what I'm saying. So, look, we're as good as anyone else in the world. I think the fact is, and I think a lot of fans need to recognise that. They might have a perception, and they can disagree with me if they like. The fans can do that. But I technically, knowledge-wise, commentary techniques, things like basic stuff, like not saying too much, not telling people what they're seeing, not calling, blow for blow exactly what people are seeing on the screen, but giving them stuff they can't see, interpreting what they're seeing, that type of thing, giving it meaning and context. That's the thing. Commentary is meant to complement what they're seeing. Obviously, I'm talking strictly about TV broadcasting now, but we're as good as anyone in the world. I wouldn't put myself in that category because I'm not, I'm just a part-time commentator. But our guys, the Bruces, the Rabs, all those people, believe me, they are peak anywhere in the world.
When you describe all those components that go into it, do you get it? I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. Do you get invited to universities that do journalism, that do media stuff like that? Because the reality is, like the athletes that I interview that have a lot of knowledge to pass down, and that's the whole point of this podcast, is to not keep that all in and actually get it out there to help somebody. Do you get approached by them? Do you get approached for any mentoring at the moment?
I've only ever done it within the employment at the time. In fact, one of my contract terms when I went to Fox to do Bill and Boz was actually to coach some of the youngsters there. And so I'm pleased that people like Abby Gelmy and Kath, who works at who does the footy now,
Fox Footy,
and a few others. Emma Lawrence does rugby league. Those kids were. I'm 60, so I can say kids. I don't mean that detrimentally. They were there, learning the ropes. When I was there, that was part of my job, was to sort of. I didn't do that much, but I just sort of hung around and answered any questions.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's something that's a bit of a missed opportunity for people.
But formally in the education system, I think it's a little bit like sport itself, Drew. A lot of times, sports administration and clubs they don't use the great players and enough, and a lot of that's just politics.
Yeah,
the world's made up of people who sort of are trained to teach but actually haven't done anything. I think we can say that across a lot of professions, and the media is just another one.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what's the old saying? If you can't play, teach. If you can't teach, teach teachers, or something like that. So it's I think David Parkin taught me that one. Yeah, look, I really appreciate your time today. I know we're sort of running short on it, but I guess I just want to ask, do you still follow the hoops game? Do you check up on the NBL or the Boomers and that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. Watch as much as I can. Don't go to as many games as I used to, but that's not through lack of intent. It's just, other stuff going on. But I consume as much as I can on telly, and I'll be watching all the World Cup games. And I confess, my son, who's an absolute hoops nut, he grew up, he went to an NBA jam session when he was a tiny little kid. He doesn't even remember being there. But I took him to all the games when he was a kid, and he still plays twice a week. He's good. Much better than I ever was. And he knows more about the NBA than I do these days, because I just can't spread the love everywhere. If I was back in the groove, I'd be doing all the detail, but I still love it. Still watch the games. I love watching it with him. In fact, watching sport with my older son. My other son is he enjoys it, but he's not as mad about it. You know what I mean? As we are. And it's all that stuff's great. And we plan to go to a game. I've been lucky enough to have been invited to the Kings pre-season launch in a couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to going to that and meeting up with some old friends. I did an interview on 2GB. I was filling in doing talkback for a few weeks there, and I did an interview with Dwayne McClain. And I hadn't seen Dwayne for 25 years.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I don't know. Dwayne and I were never overly close. Like we knew each other, and I interviewed him and all those things, and saw him fairly regularly, but we were never that tight. We never partied together or had dinner together or anything. But when he walked into that room, it was like two long-lost brothers. We embraced. I was nearly in tears. They were such good days. And you mentioned Brett earlier. I haven't seen Brett for ages, but I watched and listened to Brett for many, many years. And all those people, and the Flames, all the women who played in those days. The Flames and the Kings were big in those days. We hung out together. We it was kind of sad. I'm really glad that women's basketball's, in terms at a club level is getting back hopefully to where it used to be, because man, it was big in those days. And we all still, even though we might not have spoken to each other for many years, there's that kinship that you never lose.
Yeah,
it
that's so
was
good.
great.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's what we're trying to I'm trying to sort of garner with this podcast, is like the other day reaching out to a Andre Moore, and all these guys, that some guys that played for, with the NBL that went through a period there where teams would come and go. So teams like the Gold Coast Rollers, and Newcastle Falcons and all these teams that, I'd ask my 9-year-old son, wouldn't have a clue who the hell they are.
Well, Jonah Bolden's playing. And I said to Rob, my son, I said, I knew Bruce very well. In fact, I haven't seen Bruce for a while, but again, another guy who's just such a great guy. And still, if we saw each other, we'd be like old mates. I keep in touch with Rodney Overby, obviously the voice of basketball in Sydney. And obviously Drewy Gaze, I see him quite a lot because I often ring him when I'm doing radio shows and we talk about all sorts of stuff. But when Ben Simmons was playing, I said to Rob, I knew his dad, and and of course the funny one was Dante Exum, and I remember saying, I knew Cecil very well. In fact, Cecil was my gateway when I interviewed Michael Jordan. I thought, I've got to get in with Michael here. I've got to find some way of breaking the ice, and so I said to Michael off camera before we started the interview, Cecil wants to know if you're still mending your own suits, because they roomed together in university, and Jordan just went, Cecil? I said, yeah, he plays hoops in the NBL in Australia and for Geelong and at the time, and anyway, and so that was a real. Jordan went, oh, okay. I just saw him relax. I thought, good, this is going to be nice.
Yeah, so, when was that? When was Jordan?
I interviewed Jordan in '93. Went to LA. He was shooting. Space Jam.
Right.
And
was that when they had the practice facility next to the?
Oh man, I was inside that thing. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, right.
And he got a little bit upset with me. He didn't show it, but I'd got some inside information. I can't remember who told me, but some of the young guys that were playing with him at the time, because he was making his comeback. He'd had that abbreviated season after he came back from baseball, so he was gearing up for the next three-peat. So anyway, all these guys coming in. And in the interview, I said to him, hey, you got some pretty big names coming here shooting hoops with you in your little palace here. And I could see him. He shot a look at his agent. I could just see the eyes go to his agent. And that look said, how the hell did he know that, this Australian guy? Anyways, there's a few guys coming in. We're just having a bit of fun. And, he did the classic Jordan, smooth it all out thing. But he didn't want anyone to know who was coming in and playing with him while he was in that break. Oakley was bringing in all sorts of guys. They're all mates, and
and
that's
amazing.
He didn't want any of the other clubs knowing that their guys were coming in and helping him, scrimmaging, going back out next season and kicking their backsides again. So all that stuff.
I guess when you mention a name like Michael Jordan and then your career, how all the different places you've been in, all the different sports you've done, I guess. A perfect way to wrap it up. The last question would be, has anyone ever got you starstruck or got you, because you are very calm and composed and good on live, as we've already talked about. Can you recall anyone sort of rattling you a bit?
Probably the two biggest ones, and it wasn't their fault, would be Jordan and David Beckham. Just quickly, my thing, as you probably have gathered by what I just told you, is that my whole thing whenever I did a big interview with anyone, whether it's a politician or whatever, would be relatability. I would do my homework, try and find something that I can relate to them with personally to get them in, to get them engaged and make them feel like I'm not a threat and I'm just another guy, if it was a shared interest or whatever, just something to get them relaxed and sort of feeling okay with me. And with Jordan, until that moment, there was a huge amount of toing and froing about how much time we had with him and when it was going to be. And we're a bit lucky because, like all of these interviews, whenever you see celebrity interviews, whether it's on 60 Minutes or whatever, there's always an agenda. They've either got something to sell This one was done through Gatorade. It was shamelessly sponsored by Gatorade, which was pretty safe because it didn't really stop me asking any questions, other than maybe is Gatorade bad for you? But that wouldn't be high on my list of questions. But, in terms of jeopardizing the integrity of the interview, Gatorade facilitating it wasn't a big deal for us. And we never pretended it was anything but that. And most of these interviews, as you know, with big stars, they're all trying to sell something at the time, and that's how they get the interview. So anyway, with Beckham, it was the same thing. He was coming out to play in this against Sydney FC in an A-League game. And it was a big promotional thing, and 10 had bought the rights to that, plus an interview. That interview started out as a 1 hour sit-down mega documentary, and would you believe by the time we actually got to speak to Beckham, they wanted to cut down to 5 minutes, which had completely destroyed 10's plans to program it and how they're going to deploy the whole thing. And the politics around that was just horrific. So with Jordan, I was able to spend a bit of time just sitting with him. I gave him an Akubra hat as a gift, and I'd invented a basketball board game called NBL Challenge, which was a play on the Mitsubishi Challenge, which was the name of the league at the time. Yeah. I'd invented this board game. It was a bit like fantasy football. It was but a card game. And unfortunately, video games destroyed that concept. But anyway, I gave him a copy of that as well, which I'm sure maybe never even saw the light of day. Might have gone straight in the bin. I don't know. I told him to give it to the kids. Anyway, but Cecil was on a card. He might have kept that card. Anyway, so with Beckham, it was the same thing. There was so much stuff going on around this interview. You wouldn't believe the minders he had, the management, plus all the other stakeholders in this game. There were people coming in from everywhere, just involving themselves unnecessarily, as is often the case. So the tension leading up to this interview was just horrific. And not only that, but it was stinking hot in this hotel room in Sydney where I did the interview. And I had massive sweat stains on my shirt. There's a photograph of me with Beckham and the crew, and there's these big sweat stains on my shirt because of all the drama that led up to that interview. But again, in the brief time I had, I couldn't tell you what I said to him, but it was just basic stuff. You've been around town, where have you been? Had a good lunch somewhere, how are the kids? Just getting it down. And sometimes you try that and it doesn't work because the person's massively up themselves. David Beckham, he was fine. Once I got him just talking about basic stuff, he was really cool. Again, I threw in a couple of questions that at one stage my producer had to physically block his manager from coming in and stopping the interview because I wasn't allowed to ask questions about his wife.
Right. Okay.
The whole Spice Girls thing, but I did it in a roundabout way. I can't remember exactly how I did it, but yeah, he was a really nice guy. Yeah. And I reckon between him and me, he would have stayed there for an hour if he was allowed to. But most of these people, they're products of all the stuff that goes on around them,
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Amazing insight for us that'll probably never be in a room with someone that much of a superstar, and for you to at least, share that experience is huge for us. So thank you very much. Thank you for everything today, to be honest.
Not a problem, Drew.
It's been awesome, and I can't wait to share it with everyone and get it out there. And there were lessons in there. There's some inspiration in there, a hell of a lot of looking back, and now some understanding of how you got into it all, and sort of all the behind the scenes of how things came about. Even from the Canadian guy that you mentioned earlier, actually bringing it on board. So once again, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you, hopefully, working some more projects in the future. And do you think the Boomers can go gold? It's going to be a tall order.
Yeah, I think it's a good lineup. It could. I just wish Ben Simmons' career had gone where we thought it was going to go. But hey, there's always a story like that. But look, they're a very good chance of getting a medal. Very good chance.
Yeah, awesome.
They're a good team.
We'll soon see. In a couple of weeks, we'll know the answer to that one. So thanks again, Bill. Really appreciate your time. And hopefully maybe in a couple of years, we'll get you back on for a part 2.
Love to.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Bill.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe for future episodes.